Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to have on the show Zainab Chaudry, the director of the Maryland office of the Council on American Islamic Relations. She's a tireless activist. I don't know if you've been on this show. You were on my old show, but you may have been on this show a few years ago, but it's great to see you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So there's so much press going on. Again, Washington Post last week about a controversy over what's known as an opt-out provision in the Montgomery, Maryland County schools, but it has to do with books, and the books have to deal with the LGBTQ issues in these books. So first of all, tell us, what is this opt-out thing so we understand that, then we can get more into the issue about the books themselves.
Yeah. Up until March of earlier this year, the Montgomery County Public School System was allowing parents to be able to opt their children out of any content or books or lessons or instructional material that conflicted with their sincerely held religious beliefs. I don't know if you remember, but last fall, news broke about new LGBTQ plus A inclusive books that were introduced in the school system. And I think part of the frustration on the family's part was that there wasn't transparency from the school system in terms of these new changes that were being rolled out within the school system. It was done very kind of quietly, without any public opportunity for input, et cetera. But we had been able to work with the school system. So those families who wanted to opt their children out of these conversations, discussions in the classroom, had that ability to be able to do so. And for several months, the school system was honoring that request. Right? Like as for years past, school systems across the country, including MCPS up until recently, have been granting families the right to be able to opt out based on their sincerely held religious beliefs from instructional content. But in March, the MCPS revoked that right for parents to be able to opt their children out. And that's where where the issues started, right? A lot of families, as they learned that the school system was no longer going to be honoring their request to be able to opt their children out, started mobilizing. And so there's a grassroots campaign that has evolved that's really focused on making sure that the school system is recognizing and understanding what the family's concerns are, and that they're respecting the diversity within the school system by granting parents and families the right to be able to have a say in when and how their children, as young as pre-K onwards, are exposed to content, discussions, activities on topics that conflict with their sincerely held religious beliefs.
Why did they end the opt-out if it was working as an accommodation where they weren't banning books? They were just saying there's a certain thing on that one day I have some issues with. So do you know why it was ended?
That's $1 million question. And in the
Oh,
conversation that we've had with the school system, the response that we've gotten behind closed doors has been that people's feelings were hurt and too many families were requesting to opt out. And it's nonsensical, because if you think about the fact that so many families are choosing to opt out, you would think about the process and the policy itself, and maybe the school system made a colossal mistake by taking a unilateral decision to revoke this right for families to be able to have a say in when and how their children are introduced to these concepts and these discussions. And the issue isn't just about the books, and I want to make that really clear, because there's a lot of confusion about what's at stake here. And the problem isn't the fact that there's books that include gender inclusive characters. The fact is that there are conversations being had for children as young as pre-K that are being led by teachers within classrooms that are focused on instilling values and beliefs about certain lifestyles that conflict with families' sincerely held beliefs and their own personal kind of convictions in their culture. And so the focus for this particular campaign has been that we want to make sure that the school system understands that when they introduce these policies, they have to be objective. Like, they can't be focused on hurt feelings, because now they've got thousands of other community members within the MCPS community who have hurt feelings, right? They have a responsibility to be objective, to be fair, to be equitable, and to create a space that's inclusive for all children, regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, or other protected characteristic. We've had dozens of kids who've come up to us and who've told us that they are afraid of publicly speaking out on this issue. They don't feel safe, like, in that school system anymore, because they feel that they would be subjected to bullying or harassment or cancel culture. So it's a mess right now.
so just so we can all understand, like, can you give us examples? I don't mean detailed examples, but thematically, like in the books, like what grade is it? Pre-K you're mentioning, and what are some of the material that parents have said to you? I don't want my child to learn about this here. I want them to learn about it perhaps at home later.
Yeah. So, I mean, just issues and topics related to gender identity, sexual orientation, lifestyle choices, right? That children as young as pre-K are being taught within the classrooms. It's not just about having books be made available that include characters that identify as queer, right? These are
Mhm.
actually conversations and activities that are happening within the school system that go far beyond that. Right. And I think part of the problem is that the way that the school systems rolled out this policy, they did so unilaterally, very recklessly, very clandestinely, without an opportunity for transparency, an opportunity for public input. And so it really caught a lot of families off guard. And a public school system that's funded by public tax dollars has a responsibility to be accessible for every child. And you don't teach tolerance by forcing communities to relinquish any aspect of their identity. And you don't promote inclusivity and diversity by saying that you're going to stand up for the rights of one community by throwing another community under the bus, right? It's counterintuitive. And any school system who does that is not doing justice to all of their students.
I'm chatting with Zainab Chaudry, the director of the Maryland office of the Council on American Islamic Relations. So when you talk to parents, like for example, in the Washington Post, there was a parent quoted saying, "None of us are anti-LGBT. None of us hold any hatred towards them. We want to be able to introduce our children to these sensitive topics, which are intertwined with our faith in a very sensitive way." So what are you hearing from parents? This is one parent. Like, are you hearing that parents are coming at this from this place of it's not anti-LGBTQ bigotry? They just want their kids. Are you hearing, and I'm not going to ask you for names or anything, of course, are you hearing some parents who are trafficking in things that you would view as bigoted? So what's the spectrum of what you're hearing? I'm really curious.
Yeah, of course. It's a great question. And the vast majority of parents that have started this campaign and that are mobilizing absolutely understand the need for there to be conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is not a campaign that's rooted in hatred and bigotry. They understand queer folks are our colleagues, our neighbors, our friends in many cases, and their concern is not that they don't understand why there's a need to have conversations about these sensitive topics. What they want to do is be able to have a say in when and how their children
Mhm.
are exposed to content that conflicts with their faith values. And for any public school system to unilaterally say that you no longer have a say in when and how your child is going to be discussing these topics is far beyond insensitive, is unconstitutional. It goes beyond the pale. Like, this is the only school system in the country, to our knowledge, that's taken a step as egregious as this. And this is the largest school system in the state of Maryland.
Wow.
And so what's happening here is actually going to have ripple effects in other school systems across the country. And it's extremely important to recognize that this is not just about the Montgomery County community, it goes far beyond that.
And and what do you say to this? I saw quotes in the paper. I didn't speak to any school administrators who say, well, we want to introduce characters that are diverse in books at an early time to teach empathy and compassion for people beyond your own community. So what do you hear? What's your reaction to that? And what do you hear from parents in reaction to that?
Yeah, if school systems want to teach children to be resilient and strong, we don't teach kids to be resilient and strong by teaching them that they have to be a monolith, that you have to be exactly like one another. We've got to teach kids that there is strength in our diversity, that we are different, and that's something that should be celebrated. Not everybody's going to think, believe, feel the same way. And that's not something that we should feel afraid of. That's something that we as a community, as a society, need to embrace, because that's where a lot of our strength comes from that diversity. If there are children whose feelings are hurt, if their peers are getting up out of the room and walking out when they're talking about certain topics or issues, then the school system should provide an opportunity for there to be a conversation that makes it clear that this is not a direct offense to the children who identify as queer or children who have family members who are queer. This is just something that, as a society, we live in a community and in a society where there are people from all different walks of life. And if you force children to wear the hijab and say that that's how you're going to show solidarity with the Muslim community, or wear a kippah and come to Shabbat like prayers or services, and that's how you show solidarity with the Jewish community, then we are teaching our children the wrong principles and values. We're teaching them that you have to conform to a specific lifestyle in order, or a belief system, in order for you to be tolerant. And that sends a very dangerous and wrong message.
And And what would be the reaction to these parents or to CAIR if they said they were going to tell us about world faiths, and when it came to Islam, that parents wanted their kids not just to be able to walk out of there? And because years ago there were these, I wrote about it, there were these right wingers who were literally tearing out the pages on Islam in their world faith book for their kids going to school, and I wrote about them and I slammed them. Now this is different, no one's tearing books out, this is much more respectful and it's a nuanced conversation. But how would they feel though if that was the scenario happening?
So those, I think we're comparing two different issues here. So if our position has been as an organization, but also speaking on behalf of families who've had these conversations. If there is any situation where there is a family that believes that learning about instructional content conflicts with their sincerely held religious beliefs, right? It conflicts with their sincerely held religious beliefs, then every school system has a responsibility to honor that. You just have to be able to demonstrate that your decision and your request is not rooted in hate, right? It's rooted in
Mhm.
a sincerely held religious belief, and that's what's compelling you to seek that opt out. There are people who have bigoted views, and they would potentially exploit this particular concession of being able to opt your child out for their own objectives and aims, and that should be cracked down on. But that's not the case of what's happening in Montgomery County, and I think that the families have been very clear in the message that they've been communicating to the school system. And it's very chilling and frightening to see elected officials in positions of authority liken these families to white supremacists, right? Accuse children who have the courage to come before the superintendent and the Board of Education to testify at a public hearing of parroting dogma, quote unquote, which is a language that was used by a current board member of the educate board member, a member of Lynn Harris at the MCPS Board of Education. It's extremely disheartening for these families to see this kind of response from elected officials who have a responsibility to demonstrate that they can um, meet the needs and address the concerns of all of their diverse community equitably, because it shows that there's a clear bias and a lack of understanding of what these families are trying to accomplish.
So no, I appreciate what you're saying. The people who are ripping pages out of their books, their world faith books on Islam, were coming from a place of open hate. I mean, they were there saying, we want none of our kids exposed to Islam, and all terrible things about our faith and all that kind of stuff. So it's different. Now, I did see Moms for Liberty, which is not a good group, is like they're seeing an opportunity here. And I love your quote in the Washington Post about Moms for Liberty, that their ideology, their views, their positions are antithetical to what our communities stand for. So are you seeing, like, what are you seeing in regards to Moms for Liberty? Are they actually being engaged? Are they reaching out to Muslims and say, hey, join us, we're on the same page? Because the difference to me, see, Moms for Liberty, my reading of them is they literally want to ban the books. The parents that you're talking about in the Muslim community are not seeking to ban the books. They just want to have the opportunity to take their kid, not have their child not in class that day.
This is a apolitical, nonpartisan campaign by families who are not Republican or Democrat, who are
Mhm.
not leaning on conservative versus liberal or right versus left values. Their objectives are focused on a very principled position that's rooted in their faith and in the constitutional rights that are afforded every single American within our country. We can't control who wants a seat on the wagon, right? But that doesn't mean that that person is driving the wagon or that group is driving the wagon, right? It's interesting to see how this is being played out, because there has been a lot of rhetoric, pundits trying to fuel culture wars, like by exploiting a legitimate campaign and trying to say that Muslims are being taken advantage of by right-wing conservative groups, et cetera, et cetera. And they're insulting the intelligence and the integrity and the level of faith that these families who are driving this campaign have. It's an insult to the willpower of the American Muslim community, to indicate that that these families are somehow being brainwashed. There are conservative groups and there are liberal groups who have come out of the woodwork, and they have their own kind of agenda and they have their own kind of views. But that doesn't mean A, that they're driving this campaign, and B, that they necessarily have like a front and center or vocal say in what's unfolding in the county.
No, it's true. And we can't choose who wants to ally with us, but we can speak publicly about, do we want them to be on our team? And that's why I liked your comment about in the Washington Post about Moms for Liberty, because they've trafficked in really, these are the same people who would be against books about Muslims being like banning them, not having their kids opt out. There's distinction. What, like, as our community grows, we are anywhere from 4 to 8 or 10 million. I don't even know. I see all these different statistics. We're big, but as our community is becoming more active and more engaged in society, I think there are some Muslims in our own community, even outside, who are not understanding why there is diversity, because there are some really very, very liberal Muslims, right? Very progressive. And there are some of the ones that are in the media a lot, like, Congressman Omar and Tlaib and others. And then you're going to have more conservative elements of our own community. And it kind of, to me, it's disrespectful to say, well, they're puppets of the right if they happen to be conservative. I might disagree with them on everything politically, but is there any sense that they're being used, as some people are saying, even some people in our own community are saying they're being used by the right? Tell us firsthand, you talk to these parents. Is anyone being used?
Well, look, there's families within Montgomery County, right? And then there's outside groups that don't live in Montgomery County, that aren't connected to or engaging with families in Montgomery County, but they also have an interest in what's unfolding there. And they have an opinion, they have a soapbox, they have a platform, and they want to capitalize on that to be able to get their opinion out there. Our communities are not a monolith, right?
Right.
And our objective as a nonprofit 501(c)(3) organization is never to make this a political partisan issue.
Mhm.
Our focus, is from CAIR's standpoint, is just to make sure that the families who have contacted us and who are concerned about the school system's overreach and the egregious unconstitutional policies are being held accountable, and we're able to restore opt-out. There are going to be folks on both sides who are going to, and within the Muslim community, that are going to use this issue to drive a wedge right further within like different communities. Those folks don't speak for the majority, right? And I think within the American Muslim community, as we see more and more civic participation, more political engagement, which is a very healthy thing,
Yes.
we're going to see more and more Muslims, American Muslims, who have different opinions and different views on different issues. And I think it's a good thing. It's good, because we should celebrate that sense of, differences of opinion. But in this particular case, with this particular campaign, what I can tell you is the families in Montgomery County who are driving this, the vast majority of them, this is not for them, this is not a political issue, this is not a partisan issue, this is simply an issue of them wanting to assert their rights and hold the school system accountable, and make sure that the school system is being transparent, and that they're not instating policies that infringe on these families' constitutional rights. And then there's, outside folks who they're going to do what they're going to do. We're just also actively reaching out to media as well, and making ourselves available to help set the narrative straight, set the record straight, and clarify what exactly is happening in Montgomery County.
No, I appreciate it. And that was, I'm glad you were able to come on. I mean, I know you, but I haven't talked to you in a few years, because the issue to me, even in a Washington Post article, can get lost because they're going to highlight more of the conflict of what's going on. Now, in the bigger sense, and like Congressman Omar on a few weeks ago, we weren't talking about the book issue. We were talking about banning the pride flag in a community in Michigan. And her point was about solidarity, that there's communities that stood with us, and that in their difficult times, we have to stand with them. I mean, when you have conversations, because you're the one, I'm not talking to the family, so I don't know what's going on. So really, you're the one, the whisperer here. You're telling us what's going on. Is there a sense in our community that if bigotry is being spewed against, specifically here, the LGBTQ community, apart from this, that we will stand up against bigotry the same way other communities have stood for us?
So these families have been very clear that they believe in the rights of every community, and we don't have to agree with someone. We don't have to have the same perspective on lifestyles and values and beliefs in order for us to recognize one another's humanity, right? And these families have been very quick to shoot down and to disempower anyone who's trying to introduce any element of bigotry or hatred, whether it's fueled by frustration or resentment or disillusionment by the current status quo within the school system. And that's something that it's been incredibly rewarding to see, that, because we know that that's what our faith teaches. As Muslims, our faith teaches us to be tolerant even with people who we don't see eye to eye or who we disagree with. But obviously sometimes in the real life, emotions can get the better of people,
Mhm.
and there obviously are different elements and issues that all communities struggle with. But the families that have been driving this campaign have been very focused on the objective. They've been very focused on an inclusive message, and articulating to the school system that if the school system truly champions diversity, equity, and inclusion, then they have a responsibility to demonstrate that through their policies. And you don't instate a
Mm.
policy that's supposed to be in favor of one community by infringing on the rights of, or invisibilizing, or marginalizing, or erasing the identities of other faith communities, and not just the Muslim community, because this is not just a Muslim issue. There have been thousands of Ethiopian Christians and
So,
other communities who are also involved as well.
yes, the Washington Post noted the Ethiopian Christian community there, Orthodox Christian. So to shift gears here, in the last two questions, uh, I thought it was behind this, but it's not. Donald Trump in Iowa on Saturday talked about if he gets office, he goes, the travel ban, which we know is the Muslim ban, he said is, quote, coming back even bigger than before and much stronger than before. Then he goes on to gin up fear of our community by saying, we don't want people blowing up our shopping centers. We don't want them blowing up our cities. So it's not going to happen. There are no Muslim Americans blowing up shopping centers. And this so angers me that we're going backwards to 2016 with this guy who's unfortunately the front runner. And this isn't political, because a lot of times Muslims were all on the side against bigotry against Trump, but they could even be Republicans. But are you concerned as we head into 2024 if Trump or other Republicans see some traction for this in the GOP base, they will begin trafficking in the same type of garbage that I thought we had gone beyond, but apparently we have not?
We've seen for decades that political candidates have thrown communities under the bus for their own political gain and advantage. It's a ploy that candidates have used for a long time. And in the past, when the Muslim ban was instated under the Trump administration, these xenophobic, racist, hateful policies have exposed the agenda of the candidates and the elected officials who are employing them to build political capital within their own parties, respective parties. And I think the American people are savvy enough to understand what's going on. We see the writing on the wall. I think regardless of what side of the fence we stand on, people have an opinion, and they're understanding, more and more what's happening and how different elected officials and candidates leverage hatred towards one community or undermining one community to build that political capital. So my hope is that, our communities collectively, interfaith communities, are able to recognize what's happening, and that they don't give ammunition to any individual who drives any hatred or fear towards one another, like any group, into like the public eye. So
And last thing, I mean, we are in the beginning of the 2024 election cycle. In 2022, I was just rereading an article. A record number of Muslim Americans ran for office and won a whole bunch of things. Do you expect, are you hearing as we get closer to 2024, more Muslims getting involved, perhaps running for office, or at least engaging in the political process?
well, I will say this whole MCPS debacle has definitely galvanized many, many families, and a lot of folks are considering running for office, or they
Wow.
want to become more politically engaged because they're understanding that it doesn't serve us to sit on the sidelines, right? If you're not in the seats of power, the halls of power, helping to make those decisions, and this is the outcome, right? You feel disempowered. And so this is definitely galvanizing more folks to become more politically engaged. And I think as we continue on in the years to come, we're going to continue to see that trend. I think people are going to understand that it doesn't serve anybody for us to just sit on the sidelines and wait for our rights to be protected. We have to stand up and speak up for ourselves.
The old adage that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu is something we all know. We hear it at every event, every rally. But look, Zainab, I so appreciate you coming on and talking about this in more detail with people, because there's difference. There's the bucket. There's the one bucket of people. I don't care what their party is. If they traffic and bigotry against any community, LGBT community, our community, Jewish community, whatever, we're going to stand up and speak out. Then there's parents who are sincerely concerned, who are not. And I didn't like the fact they were being dismissed. And I might not agree with them on this issue, but I still respect their view. And you make a compelling point that they're still there for solidarity. We're still there to stand with people against bigotry, regardless of how they view the issue personally. And they embrace the diversity, equity, inclusion, but they're all saying we should be part of that. And that's a pretty compelling point there. So I
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
and just in a personal note, I mean, this is why it's even more important for us to stand up and speak out against policies that are divisive, right? That pit communities one against one another, especially communities who historically have been thrown under the bus and demonized and vilified, et cetera. These policies set a very dangerous precedent, and the issue is not going to go away. These families are going to show up every single public hearing. They're going to be demanding their rights. The movement's growing. It's something that affects their children. So the school system just needs to recognize that. They need to understand that there's certain lines that you have to respect and abide by in a public education system, and they've crossed that a long time ago.
And by the way, is opt out, and I don't know the answer to this, Is opt-out in other counties or other states? Have you heard, is that common? I just didn't know anything about it until I read your article about it.
So currently the only school system in the country, to our knowledge, that has instated this policy that revokes the right to opt out is Montgomery County. So
Oh,
this is unprecedented to our knowledge. Even in the most liberal counties in California, in Portland, Oregon, and other cities and counties across the state that have like very liberal kind of populations and demographics, they allow opt out, right? Even Washington, D.C. allows opt out, not even just based on religious values, right? They
mhm.
allow opt out if somebody has had extenuating circumstances, if they've been sexually harassed, and there could be triggering content, right? Because these school systems understand that this one size fits all approach is not feasible for children. Like, not every child is going to be mature enough or in a position enough outside of religious, beliefs that they could grasp like the content that's being shared, especially as early as pre-K onwards. So what MCPS has done is a colossal error. They've really messed up, and it's really a matter of time. They need to own up to the mistake that they've made, and put these families' minds at ease.
I should have asked that question first because that sort of reframes the issue so much. If it's everywhere across the country and Montgomery County is the exception, then
To our
like,
knowledge,
why, right?
yeah.
Why are you doing that as opposed to what's happening across the nation? But it's always about accommodation. The First Amendment's always about an accommodation, and that's it. You're not trying to ban the books. It's not what you see on the far right. This is different. Zainab, thanks so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it. It's great catching up, and I look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Likewise, thank you so much. Have a
Take
great
care.
weekend.